English translation, 881st Contact Thursday, the 21st of March, 2024, 007 hours.
Greetings, Edward, my friend.
Welcome as usual, and greetings also, dear friend. You are here early again, Ptah. Is there something special?
No, not at all. But I have to tell you that our committee is of the opinion that too many of our conversations are written down by you, so you should limit them. This is because you...
I have been used to working from an adolescent age.
But retrieving a conversation report once a month and writing it down would really be enough. We will talk about that later. But now I want to talk about the fact that, as we read further into my father's annals, many questions arise that you can answer and explain to us in detail because they relate to events that you experienced together. There would probably also be important things that would interest Earth's humanity.
But that begs the question, is it correct for me to say something?
It would probably be correct and necessary as well as according to the time. I think that you would once explain everything or some of what you really know regarding the emergence of Christianity, because more is known to you than we fathomed last year in the past. It was decided that we would now devote ourselves to the task of exploring the earthly past and Earth's humanity over a longer period of time, but only temporarily, according to my father's notes.
Aha! When you spoke the other day about the fact that last year, by traveling back?
Yes, I mentioned that. But for our multifaceted tasks, these are always very time-limited, despite all the time manipulation.
But why should I tell you a few things regarding Christianity of all things?
Because the only knowledge we have is that which we know from my father's annals, but nothing further. Consequently, also not the exact origin of Christianity, which you are supposed to enlighten us about, because the entire period of its origin and all the backgrounds do not emerge from my father's records. However, you have together.
Yes, that is true. But I'm not comfortable talking about it, which is why I have also kept quiet about it my whole life, because I did not think it was good to spread the truth about it. So I was wrong when I thought that you had fully researched the origins of Christianity.
No, we were only interested in finding out how it was that the first records were made, from which the Bible and the Quran were made. We did not find out what happened in earlier times, but it would be appropriate if you were to reveal at least some of your knowledge of how Christianity came to be. This would also confirm what my father listed in his annals, of which we have only checked very little so far, in order to find out for ourselves how the circumstances turned out. We can only do this by traveling back, but this requires not only a lot of time and opportunity, but also researching the exact time periods when something happened that needs to be fathomed.
Aha, I did not know that, then I did not. Svath taught me that certain periods of time and times had to be traveled to when we went on return journeys or future journeys. I always thought it was a matter of chance.
That was certainly never the case, because my father Svath was also not only prudent, but also strict about safety as well as doing everything impeccably and correctly as required.
Of course I knew that, because he was always correct and endeavored to do everything correctly. Perhaps I should really say something about what the real origin of the whole thing was, especially since lies and fantasy are again the order of the day. The lies and allegations about Emanuel are simply not being put to rest. This is probably because Easter time is approaching again, and therefore Christianity is being stuffed full of lies and deception in order to bind the believers even more intensively to the lies and deception. And, as usual, people of other faiths and those who are hostile to Christians and unrighteous will also use this to wreak havoc, such as the terrorists of IS and the arms beggars, whereby Russia and many of its human beings will be the victims, and that before the actual Easter season arrives. But to say anything more about this is to be thrown to the wind anyway, because nobody wants to know the reality and therefore the truth. except those few who do not simply follow a religious and/or worldly belief, but think consciously and logically themselves and perceive, see, and understand reality as it is effective according to the truth. But, as I said, perhaps it is really good if I say something about what really happened when the events surrounding Emanuel and the emergence of mendacious Christianity took place, as it also did afterwards.
Which you should not bring up, though, because the fanaticism, you cannot protect yourself against that also in the center, but if you really want to say something about it, then that is better than me just reciting what my father analysed.
Good, I do not know the word, but I understand what you are trying to say. It is probably a neologism of yours? Analyst, that almost sounds like analyze, but I think you are referring to writing Svatha's annals?
Yes, is not what I said correct?
I am not familiar with it in Swiss-German vocabulary and also in German, but it probably says what you seem to be implying, namely that the very annals were recorded that Svath recorded. But as to saying something from my sewing bag, and mentioning how Christianity actually came about, that is a thing in itself, which is anyway, and certainly disputed again by the Christian believers, etc. So I wonder if I should say anything at all.
But it would be important for many of Earth's humanity that finally the truth.
That yes, but it will...
I suppose it will, but necessity demands it for the future.
I also know that, but still there will be an avalanche that will...
That will be the case, but...
If you think, good, then so be it for once, even if I never had in mind to say for once what really was. Because firstly, I was never interested in undermining the simple-mindedness of those human beings who have sworn themselves to a belief of a religious or secular kind. However, and this should be said and explained, simple-mindedness does not mean any offense or insult, because the term only means that a human being is dominated by guilelessness and naivety, and by a sham thinking, and thus by credulity, which prevents logic, understanding, and reason in certain respects. So simple-mindedness does not mean that the human being is abnormal or stupid, but simply guileless, naive, deluded and gullible, as a result of which he or she is addicted to low intelligence, that is to say, non-thinking with regard to a certain thing or view, etc. This, in turn, is not to be misunderstood. This, in turn, is not to be misunderstood. For low intelligence in this sense does not mean that a human being who has fallen prey to it cannot be of good intelligence or clear-minded, but only that in certain views, things or directions, etc., he has fallen guilelessly into illusory thinking, and thus into non-thinking, that is to say, non-thinking. As a result, he is guileless and naive, takes everything as a real fact, and thus considers it to be the actual truth, which in reality only corresponds to an untruth and thus a lie. Secondly, I always hope, and I will continue to do so for the rest of my life, that sooner or later human beings will awaken their logic, intellect, and reason, that they will begin to think for themselves, and no longer simply believe guilelessly and naively, so that they will also recognize reality and its truth, even if it often takes a long time, if ever. This is the only way to prevent human beings from being influenced and falling prey to a belief instead of using their very own thoughts to develop their true logic, understanding, and reason, provided that they have not already fallen prey to a belief and know what logic actually is. The human being must keep himself free from any form of belief through his very own thinking, for only in this way can he be able to move in a free world of thought of an effective, logical, rational, and clear, responsible mind. And this must be achieved solely by presenting reality and its truth to human beings only in a form of clarification that is neither aggressive, attacking, discriminatory, or insulting, etc., but only thought-provoking in an absolutely neutral wise. Thoughts must be free, as the old saying goes. Thoughts are free. But this is only possible if the human being discards his own simple-mindedness and low intelligence without any influence from fellow human beings and consciously turns to logic, understanding, and reason, and consequently actually grasps reality and its truth, follows it logically through the mind and realizes it through the mind. But now what is to be said about what you think I should say? Firstly, the correct name of Emanuel is not mentioned but falsified with Jesus, for which lies and assertions are also let loose which are so far removed from reality and truth that it is actually hilarious. It starts with the name Jesus, which is attributed to Emanuel, but which he never had. In addition, the so-called Lord's Supper was not such a thing at the time, but effectively simply a loose gathering of people interested in the teaching. These gathered in a circle around Emanuel, with a small number of his closest friends sitting at the same table with him. They were also the faithful who often but not always accompanied him, both men and women. In addition to this, not only Emanuel's companions or closer friends were present at this evening meeting, but also numerous other persons, because Emanuel did not hold a supper, but rather devoted himself to teaching the teachings. The audience consisted of about 60 or 70 people in total. Emanuel's closest friends, as I have said before, sat with him at a table and drank wine imported from Italy by the Roman occupation. The faithful drank from their own stone bowls, while Emanuel made do with normal drinking water, which he drank from a small clay jug because he detested wine. Firstly, the wine was not drunk from a supposed cup, but from his own stone bowls, while Emanuel did not have his own stone bowl, but only an approx. 15 centimeters large clay jug with normal water, which he always carried with him. The whole discipleship of Emanuel is just a lie, because all of his followers were never and never his disciples. In truth, they were all human beings who were only interested in the teaching which Emanuel spread far and wide and which found an abundant audience, approval and interest. This was because human beings learnt to think freely through Emanuel's teaching, and their new thinking freed them from the all-round prevailing Jewish belief in the polytheism of the Romans. A fanatical group of Romans was constantly and secretly endeavoring to undermine and dissolve Roman beliefs because they had turned to the Jewish faith. However, the whole thing was not done openly, but was only to become public knowledge when everything concerning the religious conversion was to be realized on a larger scale, which only came about over a long period of time. It was the same back then as it is today, with countless sects all over the world carrying out their evil sectarian activities and mischief, as was also the case at that time, and was also dangerous. Nevertheless, the fanatical Roman group succeeded in secretly undermining and breaking the traditional religious diversity of the Romans over the course of time, even though it also continued to exist steadfastly for a long time. Over time, however, a change of faith gradually took place, so that it later became possible to spread the whole of the one-God faith throughout the Roman Empire. This not only happened in Canaan and the Roman province of Judea, but also in large parts of the Middle East. Even in Europe, in the Mediterranean countries, and also in Egypt, where various temples were destroyed as a result of the religious fanaticism of the Christians, for example. In this respect, the temple that was often visited by Queen Nefertiti is particularly worthy of mention, but it was frequented by all kinds of people, which is why it was widely recognized as a temple of whores. It should also be mentioned that it was not until around 130 years after Emanuel that the land of Palestine was given this name by Emperor Hadrian. Well, for a long time, the secret underground endeavors of the Roman group were deliberately concealed from the public, while certain members of the group rebelled openly against the polytheism of the Romans. However, if any of the rebels were caught, their lives ended in murder. Consequently, this fact was not publicized at first, and was also not recorded anywhere in writing. There was polytheism and a wide variety of religions in the Roman Empire at the time, with the main religion being the worship of Jupiter, Juno, Mars, and other gods. Other influences from Greek, Egyptian, and Oriental religions also played a role, such as the cult of Mithras. In the end, the secret sect group was also the one that was able to maintain itself secretly at first, but then over the course of time managed to assert itself openly. These fanatics cultivated their own religion with their own god, which was conceived in the sense of the Jewish God, which was preserved in their faith, and could fanatize their descendants, and these in turn could fanatize their descendants, and so on. Then when Emanuel appeared, they accepted those parts of his teaching which they found good and right, but mixed them with their new faith, and also adopted the laws of the imaginary one God whom they had taken from the faith of the Jews and worshipped. This early grouping, which included rude and evil fanatical elements who did not even shy away from murder, was the first to be responsible for the later emergence of Christianity from their delusional beliefs. This was something that brought murder and manslaughter early on, as did all religions, and as was the case in ancient times, it is still the case today, whereby persecution, torture and suicide, as well as forms of harassment, strife, hatred, slander, as well as abuse, revenge, retribution, and murder are also commonplace with regard to religious sectarianism. This has been the case since time immemorial, as the histories of all kinds of religions and their sects prove, with particular reference to the persecution of Christians and Jews, but also the Huguenot wars in France, Catholics against Protestant Huguenots, and then the Schmalkaldic War, when Charles's army and the Catholic Nuremberg League fought the rise of Protestantism in Old Germany. The bloody uprising of the Protestant princes is also a chapter that should not be forgotten. The 30 Years' War between Protestants and Catholics, which was caused by religious and associated political disputes, is also worth mentioning. But there are also all the insane religious wars between the Islamic Shiites against the Sunnis, who wreaked havoc in Syria, as well as the Christians against Muslims in the Republic of Central Africa. However, wars also took place in Sri Lanka when the absolutely peaceful Buddhists fought bloodily against Hindus. Even in the 21st century, as a result of primitive religious differences, strife has been fueled in many places on Earth, resulting in vicious and bloody violence and deaths. It is also worth noting what is going on around the Earth in this respect today, such as the idiotic endless conflicts between Catholics and Protestants in Northern Ireland, then the loving Christians and Muslims who are up to their hateful mischief in Bosnia, for example. The religious beliefs of Christians, Jews, Druze, and Muslims, etc., create bloody strife, murder and manslaughter, hatred, war, and terror all over the world. It is also no different with Hindus, as with all other religions and sects of all facons, and it was also the case with the Kali sect note. Kali goddess, the black one, goddess of death/destruction/renewal, depicted figuratively and as a sculpture. She has several arms and hands and holds a severed human head in one hand, in the other, a blood bowl into which she catches the dripping blood, while in a third hand she wields a sickle threateningly. She also has a third eye on her forehead and sticks out her tongue. During a tirade of hatred, as I was told in India, more than 1.5 million human beings are said to have been strangled to death with a silk ribbon knotted 7 times. Well, there are also the Crusades, which were religious wars in that the Christians and Muslims only murdered for the sake of their own religious beliefs. The first religious war was about 600 years before Emanuel, when the Athenians and Chrysans smashed each other's skulls, followed about 150 years later by the Spartans and Phocians, who then took up the weapons of war again about 100 years later. But there is much more to tell. And just as it has been since time immemorial, it is still happening today, although this is officially denied, as is the fact that entire sectarian groups have been and are being driven to suicide, just as individual or groups of human beings are murdered for religious reasons, as are people who simply tell the truth. The fact that such people are harassed, threatened, or summarily killed is something I am only too well aware of, as I have also not been spared in this respect, as attempts have often been made to get me out of the world. Now I have deviated again from what I was talking about earlier, namely that the secret Roman group was fascinated by the Jewish one-deity religion, but was not willing to accept the religion in its entirety, so they limited themselves to the one deity and used it for their faith, paying homage to a single God. And later, when they partially accepted Emanuel's teaching, they resorted to it, although they misunderstood many things. So they quickly distorted it and presented it as something they misunderstood, which did not correspond to what it really was. They quickly glorified Emanuel and called him Son of Wisdom, after which it was very quickly said that his knowledge was of a divine nature, so it was not far to claim that he had come on behalf of the only God. To add insult to injury, fanaticism of faith ultimately led to the human being acting on the commission of the one and only God, being labeled as his son and blood, whereby they naturally believed that he was the God they worshipped, whom they had adopted from the Jewish religion. So they quickly developed this delusion and began to call Emanuel the Son of God, especially after his crucifixion. As a result, it was not far after the brutal crucifixion that the fanatics of the Roman group quickly fantasized about his holiness, and even more so that the alleged sonship of the imaginary only God was attributed to him in such an everlasting wise that it could no longer be imagined without it. In addition to this, the names Yehoshua and Mashiach were attached to Emanuel because he was supposedly anointed and also supposedly brought salvation and salvation. This created the early Jehoshuatim, which began to spread quickly and openly. And this became established among the Romans and also in the Greek language, whereby Emanuel was referred to as the Anointed One, or Christos, which was then quickly changed to Christianity. And when the name Jesus was added, the whole thing was then of course called Jesus Christ, whereby everything spread quickly and also made such a big splash with the Romans that they turned away from their polytheism relatively quickly. However, this did not happen before they persecuted this new Christian faith and its preachers, subjecting the believers to torture and then to death. But then came the time when the Romans gradually turned to the new faith, the emerging Christianity, which has since brought much and immeasurable suffering to Earth's humanity as a result of fanaticism, which also happened and still happens in the form of its sects, even if this is denied, just as other religions do with their sects. And what has emerged from Christianity apart from quarreling, murder and manslaughter, war, terror and revenge and other evil, as is also true of all other religions and religious sects, is also regrettably to be mentioned. Namely that ordinances and laws have been devised and enacted through which believers have been and are being brought into the devil's kitchen. In Catholic Christianity, this is particularly true with regard to the fact that priests, chaplains, bishops, cardinals and the Pope, etc. are subject to celibacy, which is a religiously based professional obligation that means that Catholic clergy must also live sexually abstinent lives and are therefore not allowed to marry. This is completely unnatural, which is why many Catholic clergy also become pedophiles and sexually abuse their adolescent sheep, as do nuns who may secretly give birth to babies who are also secretly aborted and buried, as I was able to see for myself together with Svath. We were also able to observe that religious women, even married women, were sexually abused by such clergy. And I saw all of this together with Svath at a young age. This, as also in modern times, a few years ago together with you, which I am sure you have not forgotten, that many guilty people sat together in this regard, who did such reprehensible things themselves, but had the cheek to condemn others who were caught, betrayed, or accused of such behavior. Well, so this is how Christianity really works and how it was invented, which of course all believers in Christianity and religious scholars refuse to believe and call everything a lie, a fantasy, and a fraud. Just like the fact that the originators of the Christian religion were really a sect of the Romans who, in their fanaticism of religious mania, completely and thoroughly falsified the teaching of Emanuel and turned it into the world religion of Christianity, copied from the Jewish monotheistic religion and adopted and glorified the invented imaginary god Elohim, who was supposed to be the creator and ruler of all things, the only God and also omniscient, who rewards good and pleasing deeds, but punishes evil and bad deeds. But what religions and sects have produced has ultimately only brought evil and caused many millions of deaths through persecution. Lies, deceit, revenge, torture, hatred, murder and manslaughter, war and terror, etc., as is still the case today with all religions and sects, even if this is officially denied. And that the so-called believers in Christ adhere to a religious faith, which has become a world religion, that is actually only a product of a Roman sect from time immemorial, and the believers in Christ should think about this with their very own thoughts, only makes them think and believe. But what can now be fundamentally explained is based on the fact that the entire hatred of Jews, that is to say the truth, is that it was by no means the Jewish people who had Emanuel crucified, just as they did not shout pro and hurrah when he was nailed to the cross, but only a few murderous spectators, and mainly only superiors of the Sadducees, the radical zealots, and the Essene sect, as well as the Pharisees. All of them were hostile to Emmanuel's teaching and wanted to see him dead, just as they also insulted him as a rebel of the equally hated Pharisees, although he had nothing to do with them. And it was really only the leaders of these religious groups, and not the Jewish people, who are mendaciously portrayed in the Bible as a rejoicing people, and who are said to have cheered at the crucifixion of Emmanuel with cheers and hurrahs and other shouts. In total, together with the military of the Romans who crucified Emmanuel, there were not even 70 persons present. This alone proves the lies that the Bible makes the believers of Christianity believe, but it also clearly shows that the Jewish people are persecuted, hated, disreputable, and even murdered as a result of outrageous lies and equally outrageous deceptions and falsifications of history, etc. This also proves that the Jewish people are persecuted, disreputable, and even murdered. And it also proves how the whole of anti-Semitism is built on completely insane and idiotically sick and stupid lies and deceptions as well as falsifications, and is now being fueled again because of Zelensky and Netanyahu, of course, under the devious leadership of hegemonist America, and the hypocritical part of the insane and lying neo-Nazis in the German government. The righteous of this German government, who want to lead the country and its people correctly in honor and dignity, can do nothing about this, because the neo-Nazis give them no chance to do so, which is why Jew hatred is again spreading more and more and is being practiced primitively. And the fact that these neo-Nazis alone are being cheered to the skies with their anti-Russian policies by some of their listeners among the people is not just knocking the bottom out of one barrel, but of all barrels. This also whitewashes the war crimes of the Ukrainian army and its mercenaries and other foreign Western military forces, which are secretly involved in Ukraine, which is of course concealed, while Russia alone is accused of being the evil war criminal military. And the fact that around 50 countries and parts of their populations are being misled into supplying weapons, ammunition, and money to Zelensky, who is enriching himself from this, and are blind to the truth about what is really going on, is causing a world war of the kind that has never been realized before. However, this now threatens to spread even further and become an effective world war, which is what America is striving for in its hegemony mania, with the threat of nuclear war looming in the skies of destiny. This is because the warmongering, megalomaniac, and power-hungry Zelensky is thoughtlessly supplying weapons, ammunition, and money, etc. to the war fanatic at his begging. Of course, with the devious support and propaganda of the greedy and world domination-addicted America, which under the senile President Biden wants to keep Russia down by all nasty means. And the irresponsible arms and ammunition suppliers do not think about the fact that this could lead to a nasty nuclear war, and that the murder and destruction in Ukraine will continue unabated. However, the suppliers and supporters of weapons, ammunition, and money do not care, because they are not the ones suffering and do not have to take the fall, at least not until there is such a worldwide bang that they are affected. But it is still the case that lies and fraudulent claims are being spread in order to keep the senseless war going. This not only costs more and more human lives, causes destruction in mass, and brings unspeakable suffering, but also creates much and more enmity through lies and deception, not only against Russia, but among humanity itself, creating more and more discord among them. This is also because sensible sections of the population are now slowly realizing what is really being played out in Ukraine, and that America really has its dirty fingers of world domination madness in the game, but also that the hidden and lice-ridden neo-Nazis in the German government are also playing a false game and secretly working to promote anti-Semitism, while superficially playing and displaying friendliness towards Jews. In return, they also denigrate those who want to do the right thing and honestly mean what they say in order to truly create peace and resolve the unjustified hostility towards Jews that is based on old-fashioned and rather lousy lies. This neo-Nazi pack is a herd of evil, degenerate, and misleading predatory elements who pretend to be pro-Jewish, but in reality run around in sheep's clothing, biting bloody and lacerating and revealing their predatory nature when the right opportunity presents itself. And if we now look at the Ukraine war as a whole, then this leads me to say, as I know from Quetzal's source, who has fathomed the reason for the Palestinian attack, that the time of war arose in Israel and Palestine because the hatred of the Jews flared up anew as an imitation process and began to take effect. This is because, as a result of Zelensky's worldwide begging, many insane rulers of various countries and considerable parts of their populations took sides with Ukraine, which is led by the Jew and war fanatic Zelensky. And everything is now happening, as I already said, at the beginning of the Ukraine war, precisely because Zelensky is known to the Palestinians as a Jew believer, and the rulers of various countries are helping him with weapons, ammunition and money, etc., with the agreement of like-minded sections of the population, and are playing good friend, although various of those helping are anti-Jewish, but are hiding this in a playful way and hoping that the low intelligence of many others will not recognize this, but that they will make quite a big profit of some kind as a result. The war waged by Israel against the Palestinians, who are really Arabs and who started it all, is being carried out by Netanyahu in such a way that there is practically no great difference to the last world war waged by Adolf Hitler and his SS henchmen. This war can now escalate against Lebanon, Syria, and also Jordan, meaning that the attacks will no longer be limited to the West Bank if the warmongering Netanyahu continues to push his boundaries. Obviously, he is just as much a religious and unpredictable war fanatic in his warmongering as Zelensky, and as Adolf Hitler also was. In addition, America is undoubtedly behind the whole thing, even though it hypocritically intervenes against this and that on the surface, but in reality only to deceive the world public now back to what we are actually talking about. After a very long time, scribes appeared who endeavored to write down the falsified memories that had been handed down. In doing so, they constantly added to it and contributed a great deal to new falsifications, which ultimately resulted in the Bible. Well, it can therefore be said that everything about Emanuel and the so-called Last Supper is a lie, because there never was such a thing. Especially not when Emanuel was arrested shortly after the meetings and the last teaching of his teachings and was actually crucified, which he survived without the knowledge of the Romans and fled to Srinagar, where he founded a family and died at an old age. It should be said again, Emanuel never drank wine throughout his life, only water, just as there was also no cup from which he is said to have drunk wine. His followers themselves only used small personal stone bowls, that is to say drinking bowls made of patterned stone. These measured exactly 10 centimeters in diameter, were bosh, or beige-colored and speckled, I would say, as I have to describe them. Also, no relics were ever kept that were connected to Emanuel, so neither an imagined cup from which he is said to have drunk, nor a sword tip with which he was allegedly stabbed in his loin to see if Emanuel was dead. This, although it never took place, and his alleged death was not tested in this way, and so there was also no such lance. The alleged shroud of death is also an unparalleled hoax, because it was only made in later centuries. And this happened several times at different times and in different places, and the very first shroud of death fell apart over time due to the poor quality of the fabric. This, along with other things that are also passed around and invented, tinkered with and lied about by believers, fanatics, and, above all, fraudsters and forgers, such as that it is connected to Emanuel. This is actually the most important thing to say, but this alone is actually too much to do justice to the truth, because everything is dragged into the mud anyway and is not accepted, understood or recognized as such according to the truth by the unteachable and by those who have fallen hopelessly into delusional belief. This is because every form of faith is precisely the awareness of the blindness of faith.
What you say coincides with what my father also recorded in his annals, but which we have not yet realized ourselves by traveling back well, you know. Unfortunately, the effectiveness of the Earth humans is as you say, because most of them are not interested in the truth, but only in an illusory faith, which they defend to the point of murdering those who reveal their honesty and tell the truth.
Is unfortunately so, because the believers do not find it necessary to fathom the truth, no matter what it is also about. But another thing, some time ago, together with Michael here at the center, we talked about the Sonayer who fled to the Dern universe 30 or 35 million years ago, that is to say to the sister universe, because there was constant war among your peoples in the Ankar universe. The sonar then developed very quickly and far in technical terms, and when peace finally came to you Pleiadian more than 52,000 years ago through the great and mysterious sphere and your federation came into being, there were again closer connections between you and the Sonayer in the Dal universe, which also includes the peoples to which Asket belongs, and I had the honor of getting to know some of the persons there. But I do not want to tell you anything about that, because what I mentioned was just an interjection from me, because there is something else that I would like you to read. Here I have received a remarkable letter, which I would like you to read, which wrote to me. However, he does not want his name to be mentioned for the time being, which is quite understandable, because his words speak the truth, and it is well known that the truth is not gladly heard and brings trouble to those who say it.
Unfortunately, this is the effective fact here on Earth, but I would like to read the letter now.
Dear Billy, it has been many years now since 1980, and I have regularly followed the Figu from afar. And what impresses me very much is the analysis of human beings in general, as well as the analysis of the leading persons, politicians, and the entire so-called elite of the countries, made by you and friends. You will certainly want to laugh about it, but in a way it confirms your analysis. The last time I watched a program on the SWR TV channel in Germany, which went into the subject of human analysis. There were doctors with biotechnology as well as psychologists who were interviewed. According to the findings of the study, there is a correlation between the diet of human beings, the milieu in which they live, the context of their environment, and the development of aggressiveness. With food, there is the possibility of leading human beings to go there, or to do and be led where and how you want in the long term. In other words, human beings can be led by the nose, which happens simply by manipulating their diet. At this point, the food industry is, consciously or not, one of the accomplices to the poisoning and taming of human beings all in one. This is an interesting story because the food industry is, after all, obliged to feed human beings more or less good food, no matter how much of it is affected. Above all, the more human beings on Earth, the more additive means are declared as food and mixed in the process, and the portions of good food become smaller and smaller. As I watched this program, I could only think of you and our friends, confirming what you have all been trying to explain for years. We are being run by schizophrenic, sick people who are actually leading humanity into the abyss. If you want to talk about it, you would not believe it. The human beings who could understand it do not want to, and immediately turn against you, because it seems to them that thinking is too exhausting or repulsive. They allow themselves to be polarized by political speakers because, as you have often said, they do not think. They simply think nothing. They have switched off thinking, forgotten that it is no longer part of their abilities, and are bombarded and flooded with a lot of life events, so that they have no chance at all to formulate a sentence of remembrance. To me, this is people management on a grand scale. But where to? The human beings are kept so busy with enormous amounts of data that they have no chance to come to their senses. Just look at the thing with mobile phones. People are getting sick of them. That is intended for making phone calls, okay. But the devices are seen as consumer goods. And for what? Yes, to take photos. The devices are nothing more than high-tech cameras, endless internet surfing, and above all, a gigantic source of games. But that is exactly what the leaders want. A society that makes a lot of money with trivial things and is always busy. That is not how human beings get to think. It looks like someone is leading people by the nose, as some institutions call it, like sheep. As I write, I think of you and the Pleiaren talking and following each other on this subject. It is interesting that alongside acute problematic overpopulation, and it is really acute, there is an excessive low intelligence. Someone said to me one day, human beings are taught that everything is very complicated, whereas everything is very simple. The human beings are just not allowed to understand anything. That was the case back then, and we know it is the same today. But the consequences are much more than what you would expect. Because if human beings do not understand anything, indeed are blindsided, switched off, then a stress situation does build up. They no longer understand the world. They become anxious about events. You know, it is like a balloon that you squeeze with your foot, and before it bursts, it gets big cheeks. That is what happens with human thinking. The highest good that we have, that which connects us to greater things, is blithely trampled underfoot. Remember your book about the might of thought. The human beings are being neutralized. What a mockery this is, and their memories are gone, without substance, ineffective. They are happy to understand the events taking place right under their noses. In the end, they wonder, and the leading elite rejoice in what they have achieved. It is perverse, but that is how many situations are handled, and marvel, the human beings themselves who are affected rejoice at the things they think they have achieved, even if it is just a bubble. How blind you have to be. Today people wonder why the world of human beings is getting worse and worse. Of course, this is also intentional. The worst thing about it is that when someone tries to enlighten others, they are quickly sidelined, pushed against the wall. It is the same with books that tell the truth. They are quickly censored. The people in general are not allowed to find out and be enlightened. Dear Billy, and you player, and how right you are, and the road to shaking human beings awake alone is very hard and rocky. It is no use complaining about it. We have to try to help human beings, even if it takes millions of years. One day, the goal will be reached. If, in the meantime, the low intelligence that is now the order of the day does not destroy our beautiful planet. The task is to educate human beings. The difficult thing is to move human beings in the correct direction in this technologized world in which we live, despite their little free time. And that is precisely where the hurdle lies. Because among the variety of things on offer today to keep human beings occupied, there is hardly a segment where you can start. People's thinking is so overboard that they, human beings, have no desire or mood left at all to deal with this issue. Dear Billy, it is a shame that we never met. I would have loved to have exchanged a few sentences with you, and I am sure I was not the only one. I wish you all the best. In the meantime, I will continue to dive into OM. Thanks to you for publishing such a valuable book. Greetings to you, Billy, and to our friends, the Pleiaren.
What writes to you corresponds to reality, and it is completely understandable to me that he does not want to give his name, because unfortunately this is really connected with a certain danger here on Earth, which is even such that Earth's humanity, who speak an open word of truth or otherwise do the right thing, are harassed and punished by the authorities, or endangered or actually murdered by hostile or other views of life.
Unfortunately, that is the case. I can tell you a thing or two about it, because this is the 25th time so far that someone has tried to blow out my lifelight, whereby others could also have been taken away, with Silvano in particular having been more than lucky 3 times, and Engelbert 2 times. Marianne and Willem were also lucky, as was Daniel, who was only lucky because the bullet ricocheted off a tree when I was shot at and he stepped right into the line of fire when the shot rang out. But here is another letter, a thank you letter that I do not want to miss showing you.
Country, CH, Dear Billy, dear Ava, and fellow supporters of the Creation Energy Teaching cause. At the end of last year, you gave me the book Creation Energy Teaching. I have now read it with the effect that it has stabilized and clarified my thoughts and feelings. I would like to thank Billy and all his helpers for this valuable gift. It is a great help on my path to becoming a human being. I have now become particularly aware of one of Billy's statements. I always keep my creation energy and consciousness connections free, so that the creational laws and recommendations can work in me and through me. With this in mind, thank you once again for all your efforts. D.
These words are really very gratifying, whereby I want to thank these because they really please me.
That is also true of me, and I thank in this way for the good words, as is also the sense of Eva and all the others. But this letter is not all, because I have another one from a woman who writes that she reads the contacts and has read all the Figu books and writings. She now has questions that are somewhat wide-ranging, and would I be able to answer them? However, she is afraid to give her exact address, and that she is afraid that she will be insulted if someone knows that she is involved with the Figu and asks me questions. From this letter, I should take a position on the questions in such a way that when I talk to you, you can all read the answers afterwards if I call them all up and write them down. However, I am not supposed to publish their letter, but only their questions, which I will do now by reading out to you what is written here verbatim.
Question: why are jet fighters in all states chasing UFOs and shooting at them? So far, there is no evidence that they have evil intentions, because as I always see on television, they always evade and disappear. We also do not know where they come from and what they want, and I am sure you, Billy, can say something about that. And why are UFOs denied by the military and ridiculed by the newspapers? Question: why are many countries helping Ukraine and Zelensky and supplying weapons, but Russia and Putin are being insulted and belittled? The war does not stop and goes on and only helps to spread the hatred of Jews more and more. As you said and wrote months ago, because this Zelensky is a Jew, and he is the one who is happy to wage war on behalf of the USA because he is addicted to war and greedy for power. Are the state bosses too lowly intelligent to recognize this? And why are such criminals tolerated as government bosses at all? This pack is not only plunging their own state into misery, but also the entire population and even the world. Question: why do the Playaran and you want nothing to do with the UFOs? Question: there is a figure flailing around in the federal palace who does not really belong in the federal council because, as they say, he is a traitor to his country because he has adopted sanctions from the EU and directed them against Russia. This has severely damaged our neutrality, and I wonder why such criminals are not removed from office immediately and not punished so that they can continue to wreak havoc. But they also do other things there that are not right, like the newspapers, which always publish big lies, as was the case with the great rampantly spreading disease of corona. Question: I have heard that there were several Atlantis. What about the one that has been described since time immemorial? Question: what energy do the spaceships use for traveling?
These are the woman's questions to which I ask you if I should answer at all.
If you do not say too much when you answer, I think there is absolutely nothing wrong with that.
Well, then I will try to give some answers. The first question is actually more than one, but I will try to address it as a whole. When I look at the matter, I said just recently what is to be thought of the fact that fighter planes are used to attack UFOs and are also shot at. As I have said before, I find the whole thing not only extremely ridiculous but also dangerous. It is ridiculous because primitive fighter planes are used to hunt down the flying objects, which can evade any approach at lightning speed. And it is also ridiculous that firearms are used against the UFOs, which quite obviously do not even have to resist the whole earthly primitive attempts, but simply let all the idiotic shot attacks fizzle out without any damage before the primitive projectiles even reach the outer shells of the UFOs. The woman's statement that nothing has yet been revealed about no evil intentions being detected behind the appearance of the UFOs may well be true, but the fact that they are being pursued and shot at by the Earthlings could possibly have a negative effect. on the behavior of the UFOnauts if they were to somehow suffer damage as a result of the shooting attacks on them. So the ridiculousness of the Earthlings' actions against the UFOs is also associated with a danger that cannot be overlooked, but which is disregarded and can cause immeasurable damage to the Earthlings, which they are unable to cope with due to the vast technical superiority of the UFOs. That national security is to be safeguarded and defended by tracking and shooting at UFOs is absolutely idiotic. Because the technology of UFOs is so far ahead of and superior to all known earthly technology that there is no comparison whatsoever. All those idiots who give the corresponding orders for fighter planes to pursue and shoot down UFOs, or for UFOs to be shot at from Earth, should bear this in mind. These idiots with their medals think they are great and powerful, but in reality they are cowardly, beanpole stupid, and not only fill their trousers with cowardly fear, but also crawl into the dirtiest holes when things get serious. The lowly intelligent are then those who have to fight on the front line and lose their lives while the loud-mouthed and self-important order-bearers take refuge in their holes and squat there, as is the case with all armies and their superiors, and with the rulers of every country, without exception, who glorify themselves and live under the delusion that they are greater and more powerful than the energy and power that created everything from the nihilo and brought it to life. As for the fact that there were several Atlantis, this is based on the fact that Plato probably wrote about the greater Atlantis, but not about the other places, which were widespread and only called themselves Atlantis in comparison, but had different names. However, this was only the case for their inhabitants because they traded with the Atlantis mentioned by Plato, so they also used the name Little Atlantis in addition to the correct place name. As for the question about the energies used by the spaceships, I do not really know, because all I know is that energy is created in the flying apparatus, that is to say in the beam ship, namely for a special drive that is used for dimensional passages. However, if I have understood correctly, but I do not know how everything works, the main energy is that which is used by stars and planets. I do not understand what this is, what it means and what it means, and all I know is that the energy is drawn from suns and planets, tapped and collected or stored. This energy, as I was told, is so immensely powerful and unlimited, and also superluminal, that it can reach several times the speed of light in a flash from a standing start, while at the same time creating a state similar to weightlessness in the beam ship itself, whereby there is no pressure at all. With normal propulsion, in which the beam ship simply floats as if weightless, I do not know how that works. The steel ship is exposed to the wind and consequently also sways and wobbles because it is not protected, that is to say shielded against external influences. It is therefore also hit by the wind, so it is shaken or swayed. So the beam ship has various energy drives, but I do not know what they really are and what they mean, and how they work and what they do, and I also do not want to know, because firstly I am not interested in this technology, and secondly I do not want to know, because I cannot give anyone any information about it, and therefore I cannot cause the Earthlings to become aware of a technology that would cause a great deal of harm. Because everything would immediately be used for murder and manslaughter, war and terror if something, well, you know what would happen. Now the question still, which relates to where the UFOs come from, and what actually is the purpose of their appearance and what they want and stuff, that...
You are not supposed to have any...
That is what I was going to say, because Svath already told me.
Then it is good. When you wanted to speak, I was thinking about what my father particularly noted in his annals. That there
should be kept quiet about it. I have not forgotten that, and I stick to it, so I do not say what I know and do not advertise it. Suffice it to say that there has been no threat from them up to now, because they have only carried out peaceful functions. But this has been ignored in a hostile manner up to the present day. And what their endeavor is as well as what their origin is, that would not be called good.
Making that clear would really not be good. Besides, we also know that you cannot give out all the information via telephone because it is monitored.
Exactly. As for the further question regarding the fact that states, there are about 50 of them, whose rulers are completely irresponsible and partly corrupt, and are thoughtlessly working towards a real world war breaking out after all and expanding the strange one that now prevails, are supplying Ukraine. That is to say, I would like to answer the question of who is supplying weapons, ammunition, and money to Zelensky in this way. As a matter of principle, I do not engage in politics and also refrain from expressing any opinion in this regard. But I constantly endeavor only to state the facts and events from a clear and neutral point of view, without making any judgments. Thus I see that the rulers, and those parts of their supporters, with their actions of supplying weapons, ammunition, and money, etc., to Zelensky, who, according to my, and also your Playaran knowledge, is a warmonger and war fanatic who is undoubtedly in the service of America, are for the first time in world history waging a world war such as has never been seen before. And as this will also continue in the future, the whole thing threatens to degenerate into an open world war, which will no longer be limited to Ukraine, but threatens to spread to other countries. In the worst-case scenario, this could also involve the use of nuclear weapons, as this scenario is already looming on the horizon. The idiots of the government bosses, as they are called by Mrs., whom I would like to divide into the righteous and the unrighteous, are the unrighteous in their low intelligence, those who do everything they can to support this strange world war in the interests of America's hegemonic mania, which they cannot grasp in their boundless stupidity and simple-mindedness as well as in their rampant irresponsibility. That should be enough to answer the question. Now there is still the question to be answered as to why you Playaran, and consequently also I want nothing to do with the UFOs. Why you also protect yourselves against any tracking by them, and also from the surveillance of the Earthlings. Enough has already been said about this in recent months, and if I recite here what has already been explained, then only to the extent that it should be prevented that neither the UFOnauts find their way into the anchor universe to the Playaran and their federation, nor one day later the Earthlings, who know only murder and manslaughter, hatred and revenge, power, greed, war and terror, as well as religious mania and imaginary gods. It must be avoided at all costs that this is spread again in the anchor universe, and that things return to the way they were before peace finally came. As for the question relating to the federal palace in Bern, where it is handled in such a way that those in power there enjoy very special treatment and rights with regard to any of their unfair or incorrect dealings, if any, than those granted to ordinary citizens. This also applies, for example, to the federal counselor who made a mockery of our neutrality and thus betrayed Switzerland. It is doubtful that she will still be held accountable because she is a member of the Federal Council, which makes it questionable, as the saying goes, one crow does not peck out another crow's eye. The question is who speaks up and speaks justice, or which crow simply accepts the injustice. It is not my place to intervene in this matter, just as I am also not willing to politicize, but only want to observe and say what is really the truth and what needs to be said. So basically, I do not interfere, because the people responsible are always those in the federal parliament who were in favor of the whole thing and who should also bear responsibility for it. But they did not, even though they had to know that the whole thing was against the Constitution and neutrality. This also applies to the fact that foreign judges must never, ever be allowed to decide on any matters and laws in Switzerland, and this also applies to the European Union dictatorship, with which lowly intelligent and unrighteous elements of those in power in Bern are irresponsibly flirting and doing many wrong things that every true and good Swiss person advocates, in the sense of what Schiller formulated in his William Tell, but which has obviously been forgotten by many Swiss of both sexes. What Schiller wrote in his William Tell has been forgotten by countless Swiss people, especially those who spar with the EU dictatorship. I changed the form of these words from Schiller many years ago and would like to reproduce them here for you, as I once called Saddam Hussein in Iraq and still have them saved on my computer.
We want to be one people of sisters and brothers who never separate in adversity and also not in danger. We want to be free at all times, just as our ancestors were. We do not want death, nor do we want to live in servitude, trusting in ourselves, our logic, understanding, and reason, so that we are not afraid of the unrighteousness of human beings, but are constantly faithful to the truth and also to our country.
It is a bit clumsy, I know, and it also did not make much of an impression on Saddam when Kurtulmush translated this outpouring of thought to him. But as far as the federal squatters are concerned, I cannot exactly praise them, because when I look at their behavior, there is not much to praise. When I think, for example, of everything that came from the federal palace when the coronavirus was all around, it became clear that they were going hysterically crazy in Bern, together with the newspapers. They were tooting the same horns as those in the government in Bern and spreading roaring fear instead of providing thoughtful and sensible clarification and taking the correct steps. It was enough to exercise caution and, if necessary, wear a good and suitable face mask when traveling abroad, as well as to disinfect your hands under certain circumstances to be safe from possible infection with the coronavirus, and also to have clean hands in other ways, which is certainly a good thing. Although I cannot judge the corona rampantly spreading disease myself in terms of its effect and danger, I have realized that the scaremongering from the federal palace in Bern and the newspapers was grossly exaggerated, because as you Plejaren have clearly established and as you explained to me, on the one hand, only many human beings have died from the disease whose immune system was battered, or who suffered from diseases to such an extent that a COVID infection was the known icing on the cake that was enough to put out the light of life. And as you have discovered, the majority of deaths worldwide are due to injections because the medications used were anything but life-sustaining. I would also like to say that we from the FIGU in the center, as well as the passive members, simply adhered to the safety measures you advised and got through everything good and unscathed, despite the horrendous scaremongering that was spread by newspapers and also from our federal palace in Bern. I think this is also the answer to Mrs.
I have nothing to say about that.
Unfortunately, it is the case in Switzerland today that there are various parties in government in Bern that are extremely divided among themselves and are therefore also unable to reach a unified consensus. On the contrary, everything that would be right and good for the country and the people is usually contested and destroyed, as the SVP in particular always strives to do, but is demonized for it and called right-wing extremist, as is also the case in Germany, for example, with the AfD, which is consistently belittled because it effectively wants the good of Germany and its people. In return, this party is portrayed as anti-state by certain other parties and even placed under the surveillance of the state security services. In Switzerland, for example, various parties are also working against the SVP because it wants what is good and correct for the country and its people through its endeavors. But its opponents are too lowly intelligent to understand this. The neo-Nazis in Germany, in Switzerland, however, generally crooked idiots from other parties who consider themselves important and far-thinking and want to put a halo of glory on themselves, pretend to be particularly clever, but they are as lowly intelligent as beanstraw and endlessly demonize the good, the right, and the freedom of the people instead of doing what is good and right. They use all nasty means to make a pig of those parties that want what is right and correct, just as they also restrict or even completely stifle the people's rights and even life, morality, personal self-determination, and thus their own will of every kind through their primitive and stupid actions, and work by means of new laws, ordinances, rules and decrees, etc. These kinds of rulers are maneuvered into an office that would demand true humanity and a good and valuable life experience. But these are completely lacking in the elements that fail in this respect. As a result, they are also unable to govern justly, but can only wreak havoc on the whole country and its people in a way that would never be possible for an ordinary citizen without government office. All these bibbed elements, however, who can neither govern the country of the right nor lead the people of the right, make a pig of those righteous people who want to fulfill their governmental office in a way that is fair to the country and the people, and who endeavor to do everything good and correct. That all the righteous in government are rarely or never given a chance because their endeavors to do what is good and correct are trumped by the arrogant, self-important, power-hungry, and self-glorifying with what is bad and incorrect. Of course, it is not only in political parties that there are ricocheters who freak out and think and act against everything that is actually in the spirit of striving for what is good and right. The fact that other parties are wrongly labeled and slandered as right-wing extremist and anti-state also happens in otherwise private ways, such as in families, groups, and associations, etc., and so everywhere. Someone is always of a different opinion and grumbles, which immediately leads to quarreling, rejection, and even hatred, which very quickly leads to violence, murder, and manslaughter, revenge, war, and evil terror. If all the wrongdoers are politicians and newspapers because they are usually run by politicians, then it is the wrongdoers who remain at the helm and deceive the people who believe in politics, keep them ignorant, and can do whatever they want. The usually incompetent governments consist of nothing but really only inexperienced rivets who call themselves rulers but are really nothing but lowly, intelligent, inexperienced people who arrogantly dare to disregard and undermine all the righteous in the governments. That may sound harsh, but it is also the truth that these inexperienced people are harassing the people more and more, restricting and even constricting their freedom with new perfidious laws, even worse than it was in the days of the bailiffs, when few laws burdened the people. Today, however, it is such that hundreds and thousands of laws and paragraphs, rules, ordinances, directives, and prohibitions exist, as well as authorization requirements and special orders, etc., which restrict and bailiff the Swiss people to such an extent that they can no longer do what they want on their very own land. Soon it seems that the Swiss population will need an identity card and authorization to use their own privy, that is to say, toilet.
That all this is indeed, as you have said, it has come about in the unpleasant and very negative change in the attitude and behavior of human beings here in this beautiful country, as also in other states, is particularly regrettable, for it does not correspond in any wise with what I have learned from all the old books and writings concerning Switzerland, as also with all that has been made known to me by you and with what I have become acquainted as a result of all my father's annals. What you have told me about the traditional behavior, thoughts, actions, and love of country of the human beings of Switzerland, and about the freedom of this country and its people in earlier times is obviously no longer true, but corresponds today only to a persiflage.
Unfortunately, not only has a great deal changed over the course of time with regard to the country itself, but also the thinking and the attitude, and therefore also the behavior, the loyalty to the country and the conduct of human beings, as a result of which an irresponsibility and a kind of indifference in many relationships and a carelessness, and even indifference towards everything and everyone, and also with regard to fellow human beings has arisen. This is, unfortunately, the zeitgeist of human beings today, who simply drift along with the masses, accepting and living out everything they do without really thinking for themselves, but instead allowing themselves to be carried away in a kind of trance-like faith and losing themselves. Nothing is as it used to be, just good, right, and passable, in contrast to today, as it has become lousy, wrong, dishonest, indecent, and evil in every wise. The earthling eats himself to death with artificial food, degenerates more and more, and forgets and destroys everything and anything that guarantees him life. Very few human beings today still think about ecosystems, about nature and its fauna and flora. Only a few human beings still realize that the oceans and all of nature breathe and think, as do all life forms in nature and its fauna and flora. The human beings are becoming more and more depraved, indifferent, and blind to everything that means life. They also fail to see and recognize the pain and grief of animals, creatures, and all other life forms, the pain of trees and other plants, let alone even notice what is happening to their neighbor or to their fellow human beings in general. Murder through crime, war and terror, as well as through revenge, retaliation, hatred, and strife is tacitly accepted, and the murderous organization NATO is praised to the skies. The death penalty is advocated, and the extermination of animals, creatures, and countless other life forms, including plants of all genera and species, is accepted with indifference. lowly intelligent and simple-minded. Alleged conservationists and other supposed guardians of nature are banning and destroying foreign plants of all genera and species. Even though they thrive magnificently in our climate and enrich nature, were once native to our climate or will be again in the future. They are nonsensically labeled as invasive plants, although they are not in any wise. Real invasive plants can be contained and enrich the plant world. The delusion of combating neophytes, the alien plants that were introduced to Europe after 1500 in particular, which are said to be invasive, aggressive, fast-growing, and difficult to stop spreading, corresponds to an unparalleled lie and deception, which is why the so-called release ordinance prevents the handling of neophytes. Neophytes, Greek, new plants, are plants that were introduced into Europe, and therefore also into Switzerland, after the discovery of America. The date falsely given for this is 1492, and have become native here or have gone wild. In Switzerland alone, there are probably around 1,200 genera and species of plants that have become native here within around 500 years and enrich nature and are demonstrably very valuable and important for the world of animals, creatures, and many other living creatures. But this is neither understood nor accepted by the fanatics of the fight against neophytes in their low intelligence. The very few neophytes that are effective invasive plants, aggressive and fast-spreading, displacing and even eradicating other plants, can be contained and prevented from growing at any time by the logic, reason, and common sense of human beings. Consequently, it is not a problem to control the very few proliferating neophytes, which are so few in number of genera and species that they can be resisted if they do not become a measure of overgrowth of non-proliferating plants. Only the logic, intellect, and reason of human beings is required to manage everything and anything also in the wild correctly. But it is precisely this that the crazy neophyte fighters, in their low intelligence, neither want to understand nor comprehend, because they want to be smarter and cleverer than nature itself, which for millions and billions of years has regulated everything correctly and in accordance with the climatic conditions and the possible living conditions, allowing everything to grow and flourish where this is possible according to the natural conditions. The enemies of neophytes should think hard about this and free themselves from their megalomania of wanting to be smarter and more clever than nature itself, which has been regulating everything for millions of years, allowing it to thrive and grow, while human beings, who can only call a few decades of life their own, want to be cleverer than creation itself and its nature with all its laws and possibilities. It should also be explained that fanatics of the fight against neophytes have no wise understanding of nature and its way of life and mode of action, so they only proceed from misguided opinions and a justifiable belief as to how things might have been in earlier times with these and those genera and species of plants, from the smallest to the largest. The same applies to neozoa, that is to say genera and species of animals, creatures and other self-propelled life forms that have arrived in Europe from foreign lands, independently, introduced and bred or as exotic species, whereby experts such as zoologists have also only made assumptions based on faith as to what it was really like in much earlier times. They are also unable to find their way around ancient times in such a way that they would really know how, what and where everything actually was, so their knowledge, like that of the would-be plant experts, is based only on belief and opinion, and their evidence is often just smoke and mirrors, whereby in their megalomania of their knowledge they had no opportunity to go back in time and explore everything on the spot as it actually was back then. Neophytes in more recent times are not necessarily plants that in ancient times only occurred in a certain natural and climatic area, but which have only occurred in certain countries over the last 1 to 3,000 years, usually only because climate-related conditions and in the soil, etc., prevail. This is usually only because climate-related conditions and soil, etc., prevail that guarantee the plant's basis of life. So if alien plants thrive and grow in the wild in Europe, then the climatic and soil conditions are so ideal that neophytes also have a right to exist there, as is also the case for neozones that immigrate, colonize, or breed independently and become stable and established. It is therefore absurd and absolutely inappropriate for human beings to have the audacity to interfere, to want to be smarter than nature and its laws, and to destroy more than should be done correctly. Well, I know that plants that used to occur in Europe but have died out will return naturally. But for the lunatics who want to know everything better than nature itself, these are currently neophytes. That is to say, plants that human beings have transported from foreign countries and introduced into Europe, and therefore also into Switzerland. Many of these neophytes, of which you Plejaren have found around 12,872 in Europe, as Quetzal said recently, although the crazy neophyte haters only have around 750, were brought here by the wind in very early times or deliberately introduced by human beings as useful or ornamental plants, many of which have died out completely in their countries of origin for various reasons, also through the fault of human beings, but have managed to survive in Europe. A very large number of them have reproduced on their own and have become practically native to Europe, something the lowly intelligent neophyte haters know nothing about, while a few of them are no longer able to reproduce even today. The fanatics ignore the fact that potatoes, maize, and tomatoes, etc. are also basically neophytes, as are, according to Quetzal, around 14,000 neozoan life forms of all genera and species. Well, many plants have been unintentionally introduced into Europe through contamination in seeds and seedlings, animal feed and other transport goods, and many of these plants have been able to establish themselves successfully in European soils and in nature, and can continue to do so, especially now that climate change is inexorably altering the entire natural world, something that the pathologically hostile to neophytes are clearly unable to consider because they lack all logic, reason, and the necessary common sense. Neophytes pose no danger to nature or human beings if they are dealt with sensibly, including invasive, that is to say, invasive plants. The scaremongering of those who are hostile to neophytes, the fanatics of the fight against neophytes with their idiotic release ordinance do more harm than good, especially because, according to your Plejaren data, 60,000 genera and species of small and large plants are already being introduced every year. Animals, creatures, and other life forms are already disappearing and being wiped out every year because the new environmental conditions mean that they can no longer compete with nature, which has been destroyed by human beings, or because they are simply unable to reproduce and are no longer viable due to an atmosphere and nature poisoned by human beings. There is generally no danger of an uncontrolled spread of neophytes, just as there is also no danger with neozoa, because such a view of the future is only based on fear-mongering by the idiotically morbidly intelligent, fearful, and unrealistic. Without the neophytes, humanity would have no chance of survival in the coming period of anthropogenic climate change. And also not if reason does not finally prevail and overpopulation is drastically and quickly reduced through a global and controlled birth rate freeze. There is absolutely no danger for the native fauna and flora that any genera and species of neophytes and neozoa could destroy the important habitats of everything useful and the natural living conditions, or even destroy the living conditions of human beings and render the entire vegetation unviable. Because that is what human beings alone do through their overpopulation and their other all-encompassing destructive and devastating and completely irresponsible machinations. The truth is that there are no problematic species of invasive neophytes and neozoans, and if any invasive species threatens to spread as a result of wind-borne seeds or the irrationality of human beings, then it can basically be contained and rendered null and void by taking corresponding early countermeasures, without harmless neophytes and neozoans being stupidly banned and demonized simply because idiotic fanatics of the fight against neophytes and neozoans are scared and cowardly. Only genera and species of invasive plants introduced by the wind or carelessly or deliberately or unknowingly spread by human beings are capable of spreading strongly and aggressively, displacing other plants and reducing the biodiversity of vegetation and endangering entire habitats, as well as in some cases humans or animals, creatures, and other life forms. However, human beings can keep them under control and, if necessary, contain them so that they cannot cause damage anywhere. The human being can also learn not to touch certain plants if, for example, they contain toxins and cause burns on the skin, such as the giant hogweed, which is completely harmless if left alone. It should also be said that invasive and poisonous neophytes and neozoa have existed on every continent on Earth for thousands of years, and if I were to list the plants that are poisonous in Europe, the following come to mind: from the smallest poisonous mushroom, spotted hemlock, lily of the valley, cyclamen, daphne, aconite, oleander, blue verbena, belladonna, then the autumn crocus, which is often mistaken for wild garlic by the uninformed and can cause death by respiratory paralysis. Then there is also parsley, which is particularly dangerous in June-July when this herb is in flower. Then angel's trumpet, ivy, snowdrops, red foxglove, bitter almonds, thuja, holly, green beans, etc. These are among many other plants that grow in Europe, and also here in Switzerland, and are a completely normal and inconspicuous part of the vegetation. They can pose just as serious a threat as poisonous neophytes from foreign countries if they are planted here in Europe. However, all of these are just as absolutely harmless as the aforementioned poisonous plants, of which there are many more genera and species, if they are treated with sufficient care, respect, and caution. And if this is observed, then there is absolutely no danger. So despite the toxicity of the plants, human beings are as safe as in Abraham's bosom, as the saying goes. As is the case with poisonous neophytes, the same applies to neozoa, with poisonous snakes, poisonous fish, such as the invasive Indian lionfish scorpions, hornets, wasps, and bees being particularly worthy of mention and actually completely harmless, unless the human being does something abnormal to get bitten or stung. Poisonous snakes are, for example, the adder, the horned viper, the meadow viper, and the asp. And in the Mediterranean, the invasive poisonous Indian lionfish and the poisonous jellyfish Portuguese galley, although the venom of these poisonous snakes can only be fatal in very rare cases. Although I am not a snake specialist, even though I have caught snakes in India at the Ashoka Ashram on Gurgaon Road outside Marauli, including a 2-meter-long black cobra that I brought back to Switzerland, I can say the following and give the following advice. Although many snakes in Europe are non-poisonous, not all are, and whether a human being is bitten or not always depends on his own behavior. However, if they are bitten, they should never do certain things that are popularly known or shown in adventure films. A snake bite wound is to be treated by immobilizing the affected arm or leg. That is to say, moving the leg or arm as little as possible, as the venom is quickly spread and circulates through the whole body with a lot of movement. The bite wound should also not be cut open and the venom should not be sucked out with the mouth, but it is important to bandage the affected limbs and, if possible, to cool them with ice. In the event of a snake bite, the nearest hospital should be contacted immediately. It is very helpful for the doctor or doctors if the type of snake can be described, which is why it is very important to memorize the appearance of the snake, as the description can give the doctors important clues for the first aid measures. Basically, it should be said that snakes should be left absolutely alone, just as, where snakes are likely to be encountered, high and good shoes and suitable long trousers should also be worn.
Unfortunately, what you said before all your explanations cannot simply be changed like an item of clothing that is to be brought into a new facon. But what you have now explained is very amazing and instructive for me, which can certainly also be helpful to Earth's humanity when you teach them what you know.
How right you are, we will see. Well, I have actually said everything, so I would like to show you these letters here, which are from Burke. He has followed up the sign that I saw in ancient times, about 10 or 11,000 years ago or so, when I was traveling back with Svath with a group of human beings in eastern Turkey and never forgot it. Burke has found all sorts of things about the sign, but read for yourself what he has written.
Dear Bernadette, warmest and dearest, thanks to Billy, Patar, and you for replying to my previous mail regarding the archaeological site. I am beside myself with excitement and joy. Please send my thanks to Billy for the inquiry to Pitar and the mention in the contact report. I am amazed at the glyphs Billy included as well. I will research immediately and put together some rummages to find more clues or remarkable findings. Kind regards, and Salome Burke, dear Bernadette. In addition to this email, I was surprised to find some strange similarities to the glyph Billy shared. The glyphs looked very similar to me as soon as I looked at them, as I was sure I had seen similar symbols elsewhere.
And voila!
The glyphs bear striking similarities to the Mycenaean Greek logograms, Linear A and Linear B. In addition, it turns out that the Mycenaean counterparts of the similar glyphs also have the same phonetic value. Even more interesting is that the logograms also have agricultural elements, for example a glyph that looks like a shepherd holding a sickle. I looked into these glyphs a few years ago, but they have not been fully deciphered, so I got angry and gave up because of the insufficient knowledge of the Earth scientists. In the following, I am compiling the Mycenaean glyphs and writing them similar to the glyph Billy shared. Linear B partially deciphered. Equal sign, Daso Dana. So Dines Billy introduced the name of the people as Dines or similar. Mycenaean Greek is a syllabic script. That is to say, each glyph stands for the same consonant and an associated alternating vowel, such as da, day, di, or ka, ke, ki, etc. The ancient Turkish runes, and those of some Asian languages, are similar to this syllabic alphabet system. I do not like this type of alphabet because it is very difficult to handle and read ancient inscriptions to determine the correct value of a letter. Anyway, I would like to share my findings with you, as they are very interesting because the Cretan island and southeast Turkey are much further away. And also Billy has confirmed that the glyphs of the Dinas people spread across Mesopotamia and survived for a long time. So I assume and find it plausible that it could be a kind of key, a small starting point to fathom ancient writings. Kind regards, and Salome Burke. And this combination of letters is also very similar, but the phonetic value of the second character is different. But this could be a misreading or misinterpretation by our linguists. Linear B partially deciphered. Equal sign Damo. This is how I felt the last time I deciphered the Enoch parchment on my own, not knowing that Billy had previously presented the entire Old Lyran alphabet somewhere, counting to the lines of the prophets' names and determining the letters, since proper names are written exactly as in Latin. I will never forget this joy, and I am reliving it today. My new area of interest is emerging for this semester. Kind regards, and Salome Burke, dear Bernadette Eureka. I have just come across the most wonderful connection by browsing glossaries, and excuse me for constantly piling up emails. I am 100% sure that the last character combination I sent you, namely Damo, matches the glyphs Billy shared in the 879th contact report. In Mycenaean Greek, Daimo means district, village, country. In an extended sense also the common people, which then lives on in Greek as demos, of which the word democracy is a part, which also applies to the commonality of these primitive people to work together democratically. And as Billy said, the origin of real democracy lies with them. Presumably dems, that is to say, den, since Billy could not remember the exact term, would simply mean people or community. How the ancient Greeks naturalized this word from the Göbekli Tepe people into their way of life remains a mystery to me, but it is probably due to trade, immigration, or war, etc. Could you please read my findings to Billy when you both have time? I would also like to know what he thinks. Perhaps it would also be interesting for the readers of the contact reports to know whether this male is worth mentioning. It is very exciting to find out unexpected connections in our still unknown history. Kind regards and Salome Burke Mail from the 6th of March. Dear Bernadette, this is another Eureka event. I have found the connection to the word orlacta introduced by Billy. In Mycenaean Greek, there is a word as rawakita, which is preserved in Phrygian as lawagtai lawagtie, which in Greek becomes laos laos, where it means people, gathered people, people of a country. According to the interpretation of our scholars, the Mycenaean word rawakita means people, commander, leader of a people. I have attached a picture of the sign. Best regards, and Salome Burke.
Clearly, Burke is a very observant man, very interested in everything, who also enjoys endeavoring to get to the bottom of reality and its truth in order to bring it to effective enlightenment.
That is certainly the case, and I think that this is very gratifying and also worthy of my thanks. Thanks are also due to Akim, who sent me the following.
Dear Billy, in spreading the word about the correct peace symbol and explaining how it works, I have repeatedly experienced that human beings nevertheless continue to use the wrong peace symbol, that is to say the Celtic rune of death because they are simply unteachable or because they cannot understand the logic of how the SEL symbols work. I would therefore like to suggest or ask, if this is sensible and necessary from your point of view, whether the explanation spreading the correct peace symbol, which is always at the end of a Zeitzeichen issue, could perhaps be expanded. Enclosed is a text I have written on the subject, which could serve as a template. Salome, and best regards, Akim.
Explanation of the creation energy teaching symbols.
In general, a symbol is not simply a lifeless combination of shapes and colors, and thus an arbitrarily interchangeable sign or image that can be looked at without consequence. But rather, symbols truly exert very specific effects on human beings according to their intrinsic meaning and swinging wave. In general, symbols are a means of recalling forgotten thoughts, laws, insights, and principles from our memory by association, without the need for long explanatory sentences. Thus, the neutral observation of the universal symbol for peace triggers concurrent thoughts and peace-conforming swinging waves in him via conscious or unconscious perception, which in turn evoke concurrent feelings conscious or unconscious in him. The creation energy teaching symbols are not the arbitrary work of an artist, but originate from the scientific knowledge of the wise teaching of Nocedemion, who created several million diverse symbols and left them to posterity for positive and balanced use. Each of these symbols stands for individual aspects of creation energy teaching, such as the virtues, states of consciousness, mental states, energies, etc. The creation energy teaching symbols act like archetypal images in direct form on the consciousness, the subconscious, and the psyche of human beings, and trigger symbol corresponding effects in them that are based on the creational natural laws. Achim Wolff, Germany.
Spread the correct peace symbol because it is extremely important.
The wrong symbol, the rune of death, creates discord, hatred, and disaster. Use your car and stick the correct peace symbol on it and spread it around. Make the correct peace symbol into flags and let them flap in the wind.
Spiritual teaching peace symbol.
The human beings of Earth open the book of life and turn to the creation energy teaching.
We live in the year 2024 in a special time on the third planet of the Sol system. Unnoticed and unnoticed by the consciously sleeping masses of Earth's humanity, a human being is living among us who is the bearer of the oldest, most knowledgeable, and probably the most love-filled form of creation energy in our universe. He was born in 1937 and has been working for the good of Earth's humanity for a long time. However, he will not be with us indefinitely, because one day he too will take the prescribed path of transience. By learning, studying, and living the creation energy teaching of this fatherly wise teacher and friend of human beings, every human being currently alive can learn to consciously utilize their creational possibilities and awaken an enormous treasure of knowledge and true wisdom, as well as a blissful measure of love, joie de vivre, contentment, peace, and happiness within themselves. Creation energy teaching offers every single human being on Earth, and therefore the entire we community of humanity, a unique opportunity to realize themselves, to unfold untapped powers and abilities, to evolve effectively in terms of consciousness, and thus to radiate inwardly. All human beings have to do is openly, honestly, and ambitiously turn to the immaterial treasure of knowledge and wisdom that lies open before them, absorb it, and allow it to permeate all layers of their consciousness, their conscious and unconscious thoughts, feelings, emotions, and sensations. The human beings of Earth can at any time expand their consciousness to the positive, balanced, creational, knowing, wise, loving, and harmonious, and lift their psyche to true contentment and happiness when they finally recognize and realize that a kind, infinitely patient man filled with true love and deep wisdom offers them all the key to the treasure chest of creation knowledge and to true human being. This treasure is the billion-year-old creation energy teaching created by the bearers of the Nocodemian lineage, which is also called the teaching of truth, the teaching of creation energy, the teaching of life.
Creation energy teaching symbol.
But what do the vast majority of human beings in this world do? Apart from a few exceptions, they do not concern themselves with the true and deep meaning of life, and do not fathom the connection with the life of death, and the return of creation energy in ever-new human beings with new personalities, whereby the essence of what has been learnt is passed on to the successor personality after the death of the next current personality, or is deposited in their subconscious in an impulsive manner, whereby the human being always retains all the essentials of what has been learnt from life to life. The human beings do not endeavor to absorb the knowledge freely offered to them that they are fully responsible for their own lives, but that they must first acquire free will through profound recognition, experience, and the formation of knowledge and wisdom in order to be able to think, feel, decide, and act in accordance with creation. They do not open their senses to consciously mold themselves into a balanced, self-thinking, and responsible personality. They close their eyes and senses to the knowledge that their innermost being is of a subtle nature and will one day merge with creation and become one. In blind materialism and unbridled selfishness, they breed an exploding overpopulation on their home planet, thereby destroying their own livelihoods and ruining a possible good future in a self-destructive and lowly intelligent way. Instead of learning and cultivating peace within themselves, with their fellow human beings, and with creational nature, they create more and more war, destruction, hatred, ruthlessness, and greed for power through their deep-seated delusions of religion and God, strive for purely material possessions and wealth, practice unworthy personality and sports cults, fall prey to a one-sided belief in technology, and distance themselves more and more from real life. There is an inner emptiness and darkness in the consciousness and psyche of countless human beings because they are blind and deaf to the reality of the subtle and creational in their deepest inner being, which makes them more dead than alive in their consciousness. What most Earth humans call a good life is in truth not a real life in the creational natural sense, because the goal and purpose of true humanity is either completely unknown to them, has not been taught or exemplified to them by anyone, or they are as hostile, egotistical, and arrogant towards the teachings of true prophets as ever. They hatefully fight the truth, and the teachers of truth who are nevertheless devoted to them in love, not realizing how much they are harming themselves and what a radiantly precious gem of knowledge they are spurning. Instead, they devote their sad existence to their desires, cults, and superficial pleasures, and stumble through their miserable existence as if drugged and with diseased senses. They are comparable to drug addicts who chase after a life of indulgence and are hopelessly addicted to their vices, but are miles away from a worthy life in the true sense. The prophet of modern times spreads the book of life, the creation energy teaching, openly and for all to see before the human beings of Earth. He offers every single human being clear, logical and fascinating insights into the reality and truth of all things of life and creation universal consciousness, if only he is willing to take this book in his hand, to be taught by it in humility and to transform himself into a human being for whom the values of true humanity are more precious than all the gold and all the precious stones of the universe put together. For anyone who sincerely engages with creation energy teaching will realize that all gross material is only the means to the end of learning, but that it is always changeable and transient. The true treasures are the imperishable fruits of realization. Love, knowledge, and wisdom, which every human being can taste for their own benefit and evolution when they turn to Billy Edward Albert Meyer's creation energy teaching.
Billy Edward Albert Meyer. Billy Edward Albert Meyer.
His selfless gift to humanity is full of clarity, knowledge, love, and wisdom, and paves the way to individual destiny. Inner fulfillment, lasting happiness, calm contentment, and all-encompassing love for oneself for every human being who is truly and honestly willing to learn. For he realizes more and more that he is actually one with all being in the immeasurable vastness of all dimensions, spaces, and times of creation. Every single human being can and should now take the first step for himself. Take the book of life of the last prophet of the 7 series in joy and gratitude, open it, turn openly and honestly to creation energy teaching and learn it from the ground up. This will change his life. Whether he is a woman, man, or child, with absolute certainty for the good, the better, and the best, and he will create peace, joy, and light within himself and on the whole earth world. Achim Wolf, Germany.
What Occam has written, I think, are good and valuable words. It is only to be hoped that they will also be well and correctly understood and internalized by many Earth's humanity. But now, Edward, dear friend, I still have a few things to talk to you about that I do not want you to call up and write down.
Of course.